Hey everyone, this week we're going through a complete photography editing workflow from start to finish. So this will be the last in a series of videos looking at images from my recent trip to California. You can go look at my channel for the other videos if you haven't seen them already. I've got ones from San Francisco, Yosemite National Park, Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon. And today we're going to be looking at an image from the coast around the Big Sur area between Monterey and San Francisco. So it's a very famous area. It's got an amazing coastline, some really dramatic scenes with really jagged cliff edges and rock formations, great beaches, looking out into the Pacific Ocean. And in previous weeks what I've done is shown a series of images and talked through them. But today I thought, just to mix things up, make it a little bit different, I'm just going to pick out one image and I'm going to go through my workflow of how I edited that image. And the reason I've chosen this image is A, because I really like it. It's a great evening, the sun going down over the ocean there, but also because I've done quite a lot of work to this image. So every image is going to be different. You're not going to have the same workflow for every single photograph. But this particular image, I did a lot of editing in Lightroom, I did some colour grading, and I've also taken it into Photoshop as well to stack it and get a focus in the foreground and in the middle ground as well. Buckle up because it is going to be another long one, I'm afraid. I have tried to edit it down as much as I can, and I'm also going to put some timestamps below, so if you want to fast forward to a particular point, then you can do that as well. So let's jump in and find out how I edited the image. Okay, so first things first, shot selection. I took loads of different shots, slightly different compositions, and various different exposures. So the idea was to have some that were underexposed, like this one, so that it wouldn't blow out the highlights in the sky as much, and then some that were overexposed so that I would have a bit more detail in the foreground. And then the idea was that I was going to blend those together into a HDR image so that I could benefit from the full dynamic range where my sky wouldn't be blown out and my foreground I wouldn't have to bring up the shadows too much to get the detail. So we can have a look at the HDR measure that I did make. On first inspection it doesn't look too bad. We've got detail down at the front here. The sky's not too blown out. We can probably bring down the highlights there. And it looks fairly detailed and in focus. If we zoom in, we can see we have got a lot of detail and sharpness down here. But then these rocks are not sharp. I want those to be in focus and sharp, as well as the foreground foliage here. And so overall I wasn't happy with the HDR merge. So that left me with the three images that I'd used to create that merge. And I had to choose one of these with which to make the final image. Now I could have chosen one of the more overexposed images because we've got more detail down here. But the problem with this is, if I take this in to develop, trying to bring down the highlights on this, I can only go so far. That's got the highlights fully down there. Could also bring down the exposure a bit, but you see, I just can't bring any more back into the sky. It's lost all that detail there, even if I bring down the whites. So instead I chose the underexposed one, and it's much easier to bring the detail back in the shadows. So I can bring up the exposure. You see we've got all that detail in the foreground, but I can do things like use a linear gradient in the sky and bring the highlights back down there, and we've got more of a balance. But the problem with doing that is that when we bring out the detail in the shadow areas, we introduce quite a lot of noise. So if we zoom into that, we can see here quite a lot of grain now. So I was going to have to do something about that. So what I decided to do was take the raw file and run it through DxO PureRaw. So we'll just open up the DxO PureRaw software. Now what this does is creates a cleaned up version of your raw file, which you can then bring into your editing software of preference and edit as normal. So if I just drag this raw file into here, first of all it asks me if I want to download the specific combination of camera and lens that I used. So it was my Nikon Z7 and the Z24 to 70mm. So I'll download that selection, click save. Now we're ready to process. And if I just go up here to the top left, click process photos, I'm going to choose deep prime as the method. I think that's just the best option really. It uses the most powerful algorithms and for me has created the best results. Output format is DNG. I've got my custom folder set up for it. I'll click process and we start to see the process bar down at the bottom here doing its thing. So we'll just let that work its magic. And when that's done, it'll say, what do you want to do next? And I'm going to click export to Adobe Lightroom Classic. And now we've got a version of that raw file that should be a lot cleaner and less grainy with which to work with. So let's take that into develop and we can start editing that image. So just to quickly get started on this, I'm going to click the auto button, which is located here. And I'll just create a quick edit, which is nicely balanced and allows us to see the various different areas of our image clearly. So we've got the shadows and detail brought out in the darker areas, and it's brought down the highlights a bit in the sky. But from here, I want to start making it my own. So the first thing I'm going to do is just bring up the temperature of the white balance a bit. This is a sunset picture, so we want a bit more warmth in it. I'll do 5931. And I want it just a little bit more purple than this. So I'm going to bring up the tint to the right hand side, just to start introducing some purple colours. So my exposure, that's not too bad at the moment. I might just bring it up a little bit because it's a bit dark in the foreground there. And the contrast is okay, I think. Highlights I'm going to bring down further because it's still a bit burnt out in the sky there. And shadows, I'm going to leave those for now because I'm going to do some selective edits in a moment. The whites, they're alright really. Maybe just bring them up a touch. And the blacks, we'll leave those for now. I might come back to that. So I'm not going to mess around with the presence sliders at the moment. And I'm going to leave vibrance and saturation for now as well. What I'm going to do now is just come down to my colour palette. I want to just alter the colours a little bit. So I'm going to bring down the oranges just to make those a little bit more red. And the yellows, I'm going to bring those down and they'll become more orange. And I'm not going to play around with the saturation or luminance for any of those. But what I am going to do is some selective edits now. So we come up to here at the top on the right hand side, on this little circle icon, and now we can choose some selective masks. So the first one I'm going to use is a linear gradient, and I'm going to drag that down from the top just to cover the sky. And with this one, I'm going to bring down the highlights quite a bit and also the whites. And that's just to further reduce that burnt out area at the top there. That's all I'm going to do with that one, so we can close that. Next up, I'm going to put a linear gradient on the bottom of the image. So we come up from the bottom up to around about there. And with this one, I'm going to do the opposite and I'm going to bring up the shadows. So we don't want to go too far, we'll come to around about there. And we'll just bring up the exposure very slightly as well. And we can close that one. And now I want to further bring up some of the shadows in this area here where the rocks are. So for this one I'm going to use a radial gradient, and that will draw out a circular area like that, and I can just rotate it slightly. And I'm going to bring up the shadows on that one. Not a lot, just a little bit, and also the whites. And I think that's looking okay. And what I want to do actually is bring a bit more clarity into that bottom area. So I'm going to go back to my mask at the bottom there, and I'm just going to bring up the clarity slider. Not too much, to around about there, and maybe a touch of texture. Okay, we're starting to get there now. What I want to do now is stop the edge of that sun looking so harsh. So I just want to soften it and blur it out a little bit. So I'm going to use a radial gradient, put that over the sun. I need to make sure that my feather's on 100. If I bring it down like that, you see I've got too much of a hard edge. So I want it really feathered and blurred out towards the edges. And what I'm going to do now is bring down the dehaze quite a bit, and that softens it and brightens it. And we can bring down the clarity as well, and the texture. And if that's just looking a little bit too burnt out and bright now, we can also bring down the whites just to compensate. So that just looks a lot softer now. If we look at before and after, that was before, and then after. Just a little bit softer and more pleasing to the eye. So we can close that one. And then finally I'm just going to put one more linear gradient just in this bottom area down here, just to further bring up those shadows just a little touch in the dark areas at the front, and maybe those blacks as well. Because what I'm going to do later is put a vignette on this, and it'll darken all that bottom area and it'll look too dark. So this is starting to come together now, but what I really want to do is get those really nice sunset evening colours into it. And to do that we're going to use colour grading. So we'll come down here to the colour grading panels, and with this we can alter the hue of the various tones in our image. So we're going to start with the shadows, and we're going to make the shadows slightly bluer, so round about there I think, and we don't want to have those too strong, so I think that's okay. Highlights next, and I'm going to make these more yellow or yellowy orange. So around about there, and you see I can move around the circle like this to change the colour or the hue, and then I can move in and out from the centre to change how strong that is, so whether it's full yellow or more of a pale whitish yellow as we get to the centre of the circle. So I'm going to choose that hue, and then I'm going to just adjust the strength of that or the saturation of that until it looks about right. So around about there I think. And then finally with the midtones I'm going to bring a bit of pink in there. So we don't want it to look too crazy. Round about that hue I think, and just bring that back. Bring the saturation back until it looks just about right. So I'm thinking that looks quite nice now. And then we can just change the blending, so how strong that effect is overall on the entire image. Just going to bring that back a little bit to around about there. And then the balance is how much of the shadows or midtones or highlights we've got in the image. So Just got to play around with that until it looks right to your eye basically, so I think that looks okay. So just the final thing I'm going to do to this now is just put a vignette on it. I really like vignettes, it just helps to draw you into the scene. Adds a bit of punch to the image, darkens up the edges. And you just got to do this by eye really, until it looks about right. You can also change the feather. So if I bring that right down, you can see what the feather does. It just either makes it really sharp at the edges or really blurred out and feathered basically. So I'll just bring that back up now. So one other thing I've noticed that I need to do is just straighten up that horizon line. It's just very slightly wonky. So I'll come into my crop tool here, choose angle tool, and I'll just draw a line across that horizon there, and I'll straighten that up. And this would be the final image, except that I'm not quite happy with this foreground. It's not quite as sharp as it could be. So what I'm going to do is look at another image, this one here, where the foreground is much sharper. We've got much more focus on these plants down at the front here. And it's been overexposed, so the sky is obviously burnt out, too bright. That doesn't matter, we're not going to use that area. What we want is this foreground, and we've got a lot of detail in there because of that overexposure. So what I want to do is just copy some of the settings from this image. So I'll press Command and C on my keyboard, or press Control and C if you're using a PC. And you can see here I've got checked white balance, HSL and colour, so that's hue, saturation and luminance, and colour grading. So I'll click copy. That's copied all of those settings. And then now if I go to this image, just click auto and Control and V if you're on a PC, or I'm going to press Command and V, and it'll just paste in those colour settings. So that's going to match it colour wise to this image. And then what I want to do is select this one, press Command, also select the other image, and then I can right click and edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. So what this is going to do is open up Photoshop, and it's going to bring those two layers into Photoshop, and then we can attempt to blend them together. So here we are, it's just bringing in that second layer now. There we go. So we've got our original image, the second image, and what we want to do is just align those two together, because at the moment they're not quite aligned. If we just select both of those, press Shift on my keyboard, I can select that second layer there. We go to Edit, Auto Align Layers. You can leave it on auto, that does a good job most of the time. Click OK. And now we can see that those two layers are perfectly aligned. And what we want to do is put a layer mask on that top layer, click Hide All, so that's hidden that layer now, but we can reveal parts of it with a brush if we paint areas in white. So I've got white selected as my primary colour down here, I've got the brush tool, and I'm just going to start to paint onto that mask layer. So if I just zoom in, you can see that's bringing all that detail back now in that slightly blurred foreground. So this is going to take quite a long time, there's no way around that. If you're doing things manually like this, it's going to take quite a while. So I'm not going to bore you with that. All you need to know is that I took quite a long time painting all this in manually by hand. All of these areas at the edge here, all these little pointy bits with small brushes, because I didn't want to affect any of that sea behind. It was just this foreground. And then once I'd done all that, I brought it back into Lightroom, and you can see the final image here. So we've got all of that nice detail in the foreground area here. It's nice and sharp in focus, but it's also nice and sharp in focus on the rocks there and all the way into the distance in the horizon. So there we go, final image. I have got some more images from around Big Sur and the coastline between Monterey and San Francisco, and I was going to show them in this video, but I am conscious that it has gone on for quite a long time already. So instead I'm going to put those on various social media accounts which you can find at my website robertbishop.uk or in the About section on YouTube. So go check that out, and if you want to have a look at those images you can do. But that's it for this video, so thanks a lot for watching everyone. If you have found it useful or you've liked it, then please give me a thumbs up just down below. If you are new to the channel and you'd like to subscribe, then you can click on the big red button. That way you'll keep up to date with everything I'm doing each and every week. There's a new video every Sunday morning at 10 AM UK time. Next week, I am finally going to get out and do some woodland photography. I've been saying I'm going to do it for a while now, but the conditions are going to be good this weekend, I think. So I will, fingers crossed, have that video for you next week with those epic conditions in the autumn woodland landscape. So tune in for that one. Until then, thanks a lot everyone, and bye for now.